I came back from church with a foil pan of funeral potatoes in one hand and my Bible tucked under my arm. And for a moment, I genuinely wondered if I had walked up to the wrong house. Not because the ranch house looked different. It didn't. The white siding had faded the same soft cream color from years of Texas sun. The wide porch still stretched across the front, the way Robert liked it. The cedar post he cut himself still stood at the corner because, as he used to say, store-bought posts always looked embarrassed to be standing there. Out past the fencing, the windmill was making its slow, uneven clicking sound. One blade always caught a second late. Robert used to joke that it sounded like an old man clearing his throat. Everything looked familiar, except the front door. I slid my key into the lock, and it wouldn't turn. At first, I assumed my fingers were stiff from carrying too much. The foil pan was still warm against my palm. Then I wondered if I had somehow grabbed the wrong key from the ring, which would have been unusual because I had carried that same brass house key since 1998. I could probably find it in the dark. I tried again, slower this time. The key went in smoothly. It just didn't catch. I remember standing there for a second longer than necessary, staring at the lock. That was when I noticed the scrape marks around the metal plate. Fresh ones. Bright steel showing through the paint. At the time, I didn't give that detail a name. Later, I would realize it was the first sign something had already been decided without me. I knocked once. Not loudly. No answer. So I knocked again. That's when I heard footsteps inside the house. Not quick ones. Not surprised ones. Slow, measured steps, the kind that tell you someone already knows you're there and is deciding how much of themselves to reveal. The door opened about 4 inches. My son Wade stood there wearing one of Robert's old denim shirts. It hung on him in a way that didn't quite fit. He hadn't shaved. His eyes looked puffy, though not from crying. More like sleep and irritation. He kept one hand on the doorframe and didn't open it any wider. "Hey, Mom," he said. It was a small greeting, but it sounded like the kind you give a stranger who's arrived earlier than expected. My eyes moved from his face to the new deadbolt above the knob, then back again. "Why doesn't my key work?" I asked. He exhaled slowly, like I'd asked something inconvenient. "We changed the locks this morning." "We." That word landed before the rest of the sentence had time to settle. Behind him, I caught movement in the hallway. Brandy was walking from the kitchen carrying one of my serving bowls, the large yellow one with the chip beneath the handle. I noticed it immediately, because I'd baked cornbread in that bowl so many winters that seeing someone else carry it through the house felt strangely personal. I said quietly, "You changed the locks on my house." Wade shifted his weight. "It's not like that. That's something people tend to say right before explaining that it's exactly like that." Brandy stepped up behind his shoulder then, wearing that soft, careful expression she used when she wanted to sound reasonable. Her hair was curled neatly. I remember noticing that detail. We had buried Robert 11 days earlier, and she had clearly taken time with a curling iron. "Emily," she said gently, her voice calm in that practiced way. "Nobody wants this to feel upsetting. We just think that, with everything going on, it might be better if everyone had a little space until the family figures things out." I looked past them into my living room. Robert's chair was still beside the fireplace, but the Afghan my sister made him had been removed from the back. On the console table, the framed photo from our 25th anniversary had been moved, not taken down, just shifted a couple feet to the left, the way someone does when they've started rearranging a house before asking permission. That was the moment the room went quiet inside me. Some kinds of humiliation arrive loudly, in front of an audience. Others arrive politely, in soft voices on a porch you paid for. The second kind takes longer to understand. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked. Wade answered too quickly. "The bunkhouse is ready." Ready, as if someone had been preparing for my relocation. Brandy nodded slightly. "It's temporary. From somewhere deeper inside the house, I heard her father's voice. Ron, low and confident, already comfortable. I couldn't hear the words, just the tone. That tone mattered more than the sentence. It was the sound of a man speaking from inside, a place he had no right settling into. Mom, Wade said quietly, lowering his voice. Just for now, don't make this harder than it has to be. Some people mistake silence for permission. I didn't say that out loud then. The thought only passed through my mind briefly, like something half-formed. I shifted the foil pan to my other hand. Move, I said. He blinked. What? I said move. For a moment I thought he might actually do it. Some reflex might kick in. The habit he had growing up of stepping aside when I walked through the door with groceries or laundry, or one of his childhood fevers in the middle of the night. But he stayed where he was. Brandy crossed her arms. Emily, this isn't helping. I looked directly at my son. Are you telling me I cannot come into my own home? His jaw tightened slightly. We just need some time, he said. The ranch needs to be handled right, and right now everything's a mess. Ron's helping us get organized. The ranch needs to be handled right. The phrasing was strange enough that I noticed it immediately. Not grief language, not family language, management language. Someone had already started discussing land and decisions as if widowhood were simply a vacancy. I set the foil pan down on the porch bench because my hand had begun to tremble, and I didn't want to give them that small victory. At the time, I didn't think much of it, when Cheryl walked into view, carrying a roll of blue painter's tape and a marker. But later, I realized that moment mattered more than I understood. People who bring labeling supplies into a house are not planning to stay briefly. She paused when she saw me. Oh, she said, smiling politely. We didn't know you'd be back so soon. Back? As if I had been away on vacation instead of returning from church after burying my husband. My mouth felt dry. Wade, I said calmly, go get my handbag from the kitchen table and my medicine from the bathroom drawer. He didn't move. Brandy answered instead. We packed some essentials already. Packed. Another word people shouldn't use about your life while you're still living it. She gestured toward the bunkhouse behind me. You'll be comfortable there for now. I stood there another moment, looking past them into the hallway where I had lived most of my adult life. If I raised my voice, they would use it. If I pushed past them, they would call it instability. That part had already been decided, so I chose procedure over reaction. All right, I said. Wade relaxed too quickly. I picked up the foil pan again, slipped my keys back into my purse, and asked one final question. Who changed the locks? No one answered at first. Then Ron called out from inside the house without bothering to appear. Licensed guy from Abilene. Did it proper. He sounded proud of that detail. I nodded once. Good to know. Then I walked down the porch steps with my Bible under one arm and crossed the yard toward the bunkhouse they had prepared for me. The afternoon was completely still. When your life shifts suddenly, you notice strange things. The horse trough by the fence needed cleaning. Someone had left the south pasture gate unlatched. A feed receipt had blown halfway under a flower pot. The mind records details when it's trying not to split apart. Inside the bunkhouse, my suitcase sat on the bed. Not beside the bed, on it. Zipped, closed, waiting. That's when everything changed. I set the foil pan down on the small laminate table and looked around. 3 framed photographs had been placed on the dresser. Not the wedding photo, not the Christmas one. Just 3 neutral ones. The kind of choices someone makes when they're trying to appear considerate without preserving anything important. On top of the suitcase sat a manila envelope with my name written in thick black marker, not Robert's handwriting. Inside were my blood pressure pills, a toothbrush, 2 nightgowns, and a note written on torn legal pad paper. For now, this is best for everyone. No signature. I sat down on the edge of the bed and looked out the bunkhouse window toward the main house. From there I could see the roofline and the porch where Robert used to shell pecans in the fall. I didn't cry. Not then. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and called the one person I trusted to understand the difference between family emotion and legal reality. My brother Tom answered on the second ring. I said one sentence. They changed the locks. He was quiet for half a beat. Then he asked, in that calm way of his that meant he was already thinking ahead, "Did they put that in writing anywhere?" And for the first time all day, the ground under me felt steady again. Tom didn't answer my question right away. That pause told me more than anything a quick answer would have. My brother had always been that way. When something serious happened, he stopped first, listened, measured the situation in silence before speaking. "You don't know?" he said finally. "No," I replied. I was still sitting on the bunkhouse bed, staring at the cardboard box Cheryl had carried in earlier. Robert's spare coffee mug rested on top of a folded sweater, placed there so deliberately that it almost felt like a display. I picked it up and turned it slowly in my hands while I waited for Tom to continue. "Robert asked me to witness the will update," Tom said at last. 3 years ago. 3 years. I tried to place the time. It would have been around the period when Robert first began having heart trouble. He never admitted it openly, but I remember the way he would sit a little longer before standing up from the porch chair. "He told you?" I asked. "Only part of it," Tom said. "Enough that I'd understand if something ever looked off." The word hung there for a moment. "What part?" I asked. "The authority clause." The phrase sounded oddly formal for a conversation between siblings standing in a ranch bunkhouse. "What authority clause?" I asked. Tom shifted something on his desk. I could hear paper moving through the phone line. "Emily," he said carefully, "your husband built safeguards into that will. Most people only think about inheritance." Robert thought about control. The sentence cooled the room. "Control of what?" I asked. "The ranch." Outside the bunkhouse window, the wind pushed against the siding again. The metal panel rattled softly. Through the glass, I could see the porch light at the main house flick on as the afternoon dimmed toward evening. "What kind of safeguard?" I asked. Tom paused before answering. "The property doesn't pass automatically to Wade." I blinked. "Well, of course not," I said. "It's mine." "Yes," Tom replied calmly. But Robert also added a conditional inheritance clause for Wade. I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on my knees. "Conditional how?" Tom spoke slowly now, the way he always did when he wanted every word to land properly. "If Wade ever attempts to take possession of the ranch through coercion, intimidation, or manipulation toward you, he forfeits his inheritance entirely." The sentence settled into the quiet room. I didn't respond immediately. Not because I didn't understand it, but because a memory had suddenly surfaced. Robert, sitting at the kitchen table late one evening, papers spread in front of him. The yellow desk lamp casting that warm circle of light he always liked. At the time, I assumed he was just organizing ranch documents. Now that memory felt different. "So if Wade," I started, then stopped. Tom finished the thought for me. "If Wade tries to push you out or take control improperly, the ranch bypasses him entirely." "And goes where?" I asked. "Your trust decides," Tom said. Robert built a secondary distribution structure. That phrase sounded complicated enough that I pressed my fingers lightly against my forehead. "At the time," Tom continued, "Robert said something I remember very clearly." "What?" Tom paused again. He said, "Emily will always give Wade the benefit of the doubt, so the law has to give her backup." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Outside the bunkhouse window, the porch light at the main house glowed brighter as the sky darkened. Wade was standing outside now, talking with Ron. Cheryl had come out carrying a clipboard. They were measuring something. The barn walkway, perhaps, or the porch steps. People planning ownership always start with measurements. That's when the room went quiet. I said softly. Tom didn't ask what I meant. He understood. Tomorrow morning, he said calmly, we go to the county office and read the will in full. What happens if the clause applies? I asked. Tom's voice shifted into that purely procedural tone he used when dealing with legal matters. Then the ranch remains fully under your authority. Wade cannot legally assume control. And if he tries anyway? Then we document it. I looked out the window again. Ron was pointing toward the barn now, explaining something to Wade with wide, confident gestures. Cheryl was writing notes on the clipboard. None of them looked toward the bunkhouse. That detail mattered more than anything else. They think this is temporary, I said. What is? Tom asked. My staying back here? Tom didn't answer. He didn't need to, because just then another memory surfaced. Late summer, 2 years before Robert died. We were standing near the horse trough after sunset. The sky had turned that soft purple color Texas evenings sometimes get. Cicadas buzzed loudly in the trees, forcing us to pause between sentences. Robert had been checking the gate latch when Wade drove up in his truck with Brandy beside him. They didn't get out right away. Robert watched them for a moment. Then he said something quietly. Sometimes people confuse inheritance with permission. I remember asking him what he meant. He had shrugged and said, just something I've been noticing. At the time, I thought he meant Wade's impatience about expanding the cattle operation. Now the memory landed differently. Back in the bunkhouse, Tom spoke again. Emily, listen carefully. Tomorrow morning we confirm the language of that clause. All right. Tonight, you don't argue with anyone. I wasn't planning to. Good. Then he added one more instruction. If they ask you to sign anything, don't. I won't. And Emily, yes? If they've already changed the locks, the situation may already qualify under the clause. The words settled slowly. My eyes drifted back toward the house. Wade had gone inside now. Ron and Cheryl were still outside, talking quietly under the porch light. Cheryl peeled a strip of blue painter's tape and stuck it beside the doorframe, writing something on it with a marker, labeling something again. Another small detail. Another loop waiting to close. Tom, I said quietly. Yes? I think they're planning more than organizing. I assumed that, he replied. Then he said something that would matter later. Most people who try to take land make one mistake. What's that? They assume paperwork comes after the takeover. And, in reality, Tom said, paperwork is what decides who actually owns the land. I looked at the porch one last time. Ron and Cheryl were heading inside now. The front door closed behind them. The ranch went quiet again. I stood up slowly and walked over to the bunkhouse table. Robert's spare coffee mug sat beside the cardboard box. I picked it up again and ran my thumb along the chipped edge. Robert always said the same thing about land and law. You can't take what was never yours. At the time, it sounded like ranch wisdom. Now it sounded like preparation. And tomorrow morning, we were going to find out exactly how prepared he had been. The next morning began earlier than I expected. I woke before the alarm, the way people sometimes do when their mind has been working quietly all night, sorting through something it hasn't fully explained yet. The bunkhouse window carried that pale grey light that appears just before sunrise in West Texas. Outside, the windmill was already turning slowly, the familiar uneven click of its blades drifting through the still air. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then I noticed the cardboard box on the dresser, and everything returned. I dressed slowly, tying my hair back the way I always had, before starting ranch chores. Habit can be comforting when everything else feels uncertain. When I stepped outside, Tom's truck was already coming down the gravel drive. His timing had always been precise. When we were children, he used to arrive for dinner, exactly when our mother finished setting the table. He stepped out of the truck, carrying a leather folder. "Morning," he said. "Morning." Neither of us mentioned the bunkhouse. Some things didn't need explanation. We drove into town, mostly in silence. The ranch road fed into the highway the same way it always had. 2 long, straight miles past mesquite and dry grass. I had taken that drive thousands of times in my life. Yet that morning, every mile felt slightly unfamiliar, as if the land had shifted half an inch overnight. About 10 minutes outside town, Tom finally spoke. "Did anyone give you paperwork yesterday?" "No." "Did anyone ask you to sign anything?" "No." He nodded once. "That's good." We pulled into Abilene just after 9. The county building looked exactly as it always had. Square, brick, practical. People walked in and out, carrying folders and coffee cups, moving through ordinary business that rarely draws attention but quietly determines the direction of people's lives. Inside, the air conditioning hummed steadily, and the floors carried that faint scent of cleaning solution. Tom walked straight to the records counter like a man who had done this many times before. A clerk with reading glasses looked up from her screen. "Morning," Tom replied. "We need to review the estate file for Robert Walker." She typed for a moment, scanning her monitor. "Files archived, but accessible. Give me a minute." While she disappeared into the back room, I watched the quiet activity around us. A couple stood near the tax window, arguing in low voices. A rancher leaned over a counter studying property maps. Somewhere, a printer beeped repeatedly. Institutional places have their own rhythm. They don't react to personal drama. They simply record outcomes. The clerk returned, carrying a thick file, and placed it on the counter. "There you go." Tom thanked her and led me to a small review table near the window. He opened the file carefully. The first pages were familiar documents: death certificate copies, probate notes, trust paperwork. Then he reached a section marked Final Will and Testament. "That's the one," he said. I felt a strange calm settle over me as he slid the document across the table. Robert's name appeared at the top in neat legal lettering. Tom read quietly for a moment, scanning paragraphs with the efficiency of someone trained to notice important details. Then his finger stopped halfway down page 3. "There it is." He turned the paper toward me. I leaned closer. The language was formal but clear enough to follow. "Any attempt by my son, Wade Walker, or any representative acting on his behalf, to assume control, occupancy, or management of the Walker Ranch through intimidation, coercion, or manipulation toward my wife, Emily Walker, shall immediately void his inheritance rights." I read the sentence once, then again, and then a third time. That's when the lawyer looked up and paused, Tom said quietly, tapping the page. He continued reading. "In such event, all property interest shall remain solely with my wife, and shall transfer according to the secondary trust structure outlined herein." I leaned back slowly in the chair. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Across the room, someone laughed near the tax counter. The sound felt strangely distant. Tom folded his hands. "Well," he said. "That's clear." I nodded slowly. "Yes." He pulled another document from the folder. "This part matters too." It was the trust attachment Robert had mentioned. Inside was a simple structure. If Wade forfeited inheritance through the clause, the ranch would remain under my authority permanently unless I chose otherwise. No automatic transfer. No forced succession. No loophole. Just authority. I stared at the page for a long time. Finally, I said something I hadn't allowed myself to think yet. Robert saw this coming. Tom didn't argue. He simply nodded once. Looks like he did. At that moment, the clerk walked past our table carrying another stack of files. Tom raised his hand slightly. "Excuse me." She stopped. "Yes?" Tom asked a simple procedural question. "If someone tried to file property authority changes for this ranch, where would that show up?" She didn't hesitate. "County clerk filings," she said. "Title transfers, management authorizations, power of attorney filings, anything like that." Tom nodded. Would you mind checking if anything was submitted yesterday? The clerk turned back toward the computer. A minute passed, then another. Finally, she shook her head. Nothing filed. Tom looked at me. That's important, he said quietly. Why? I asked. Because it means they haven't formalized anything yet. He closed the will folder gently. Right now, all they've done is change locks. The sentence sounded almost casual, but its meaning carried weight. Changing locks might control a door. It didn't change the law. We sat there another minute while Tom organized the papers back into the folder. Before standing up, he said something calmly that stayed with me. Authority doesn't come from saying something first. I looked at the will again. Where does it come from? Tom nodded toward the document. From what's already written. That sentence settled somewhere deep inside me. Because at that moment, across town on my ranch, Wade and his in-laws were probably walking through rooms, making plans, talking about land, talking about improvements, talking about what would happen next. And none of them knew the most important rule had already been written years earlier. We thanked the clerk and stepped back outside into the Texas sunlight. As we walked toward the truck, Tom said something else. We're not done yet. What do you mean? We've confirmed the rule. He opened the truck door. Now we wait to see how they break it. And that was the moment the situation truly began to escalate. When Tom said we would wait to see how they broke the rule, I understood what he meant. Procedure only works if someone reveals their intentions. We drove back to the ranch just after noon. The sun had burned the morning haze away, leaving the pasture wide and bright. The windmill had picked up enough breeze to spin steadily now instead of clicking unevenly. Tom parked beside the bunkhouse. Neither of us went straight to the house. Instead, we sat there for a moment, watching. From where we were parked, the front porch was clearly visible. Ron's truck was still in the driveway. Cheryl's sedan sat behind it. The front door stood open, and now and then voices drifted out, though we couldn't make out what they were saying. That's our social lane, Tom said quietly. My what? I asked. Your witnesses, he clarified. He nodded toward the north fence line. 2 of our neighbors were repairing a section of barbed wire along the property boundary. They paused occasionally, glancing toward the house. News travels quickly in small Texas counties. I stepped out of the truck. The ranch air smelled the same as it always had. Dry grass, dust, and the faint metallic scent of farm equipment. It felt strange that something so steady could exist while the people inside the house were quietly trying to rearrange my life. Tom followed me toward the bunkhouse. Let's keep things calm, he said. For now we observe. Inside the bunkhouse, we sat at the small laminate table. Tom opened his folder again. Next lane is financial, he said. What does that mean? It means if they believe they're taking control of the ranch, eventually they'll try to touch something that requires documentation. Like what? Bank accounts, equipment titles, property insurance. He tapped the folder lightly. And when they do, that's where the rule bites. At the time, I didn't realize how quickly that would happen. Around 2 o'clock that afternoon, Wade walked across the yard again. This time, Ron came with him. I noticed immediately that Ron was carrying a thin stack of papers in his hand. There are certain moments when the temperature inside a situation shifts. That was one of them. They stepped into the bunkhouse without knocking. Ron spoke first. Afternoon, Emily. His voice carried the same smooth confidence I had heard the day before. Afternoon, I replied. Wade stayed near the door. Ron laid the papers on the table between us. We're just trying to get things organized, he said. There are a few management forms we'd like you to sign. Tom didn't speak yet. He simply leaned back in his chair and looked at the papers. I glanced down. The top page read, Property Management Authorization. My name appeared at the top. Wade's name appeared beneath it. That's when everything changed. Because this was the moment the situation moved from family disagreement into documented intent. What exactly does this do? I asked. Ron smiled politely. It allows Wade to handle ranch operations more efficiently. Tom finally spoke. Efficient for who? Ron turned toward him, noticing him more carefully now. And you are? Her brother. Ron nodded slowly. Well, we're simply helping the family move forward. Tom reached forward and picked up the first page. He read it quietly. Then he flipped to the second page. Then the third. His expression never changed. Finally, he set the pages back on the table. No, he said calmly. Ron frowned. Excuse me? She's not signing that. Wade stepped forward. Tom, this isn't your decision. Tom looked at him evenly. No, he agreed. It's Emily's. Then he slid the document back toward Ron. But legally speaking, this form would give you operational control of the ranch. Ron folded his arms. That's the idea. Tom nodded once. That would be a problem. Why? Wade asked. Tom tapped the folder in front of him. Because your father's will contains an authority clause. For the first time since they walked in, Wade looked uncertain. What clause? Tom spoke slowly. If you attempt to assume control of the ranch through coercion or manipulation toward your mother, you lose your inheritance. The room went quiet. That sentence had been building quietly since yesterday. Now it landed. Ron's confident expression shifted slightly. That's ridiculous, he said. Tom slid a photocopy of the will across the table. You're welcome to read it. Ron did. His eyes moved across the paragraph once. Then again. He didn't speak for several seconds. Wade leaned over his shoulder, trying to read the same page. What does that mean? Wade asked. Tom answered calmly. It means if you push your mother out or try to take the ranch without her consent, the property will never transfer to you. Ron set the page down slowly. That clause would never hold up. Tom shrugged slightly. It already has. He tapped the courthouse seal on the document. Filed 3 years ago. That's when the room went quiet again. Not stunned silence. A colder one. Wade looked at me. Mom, you knew about this? No, I said honestly. Then why are you letting him threaten us with it? Tom answered before I could. This isn't a threat. He leaned forward slightly. It's a rule. Ron's voice hardened. Robert never mentioned anything like that. Tom smiled faintly. That was the point. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Wade pushed the papers back toward Ron. We'll deal with this later, he muttered. Ron gathered the documents slowly. As they turned toward the door, Tom added one more sentence. You should be careful. Ron stopped. Why? Tom spoke calmly. Because the clause activates when control is attempted. He gestured toward the papers Ron was holding. And those documents are evidence. That line landed harder than anything else said that afternoon. Ron and Wade left the bunkhouse without another word. Through the window, I watched them cross the yard toward the house. Ron was talking quickly now. Wade looked less certain. The social lane had shifted. Neighbors were still working along the fence line. One of them glanced toward the bunkhouse. The story was spreading. Tom leaned back in his chair again. Well, he said quietly. That escalated faster than expected. I exhaled slowly. What happens now? Tom closed the folder. Now we watch the financial lane. And if they keep pushing, he looked toward the main house. Then the clause triggers. Outside, the wind picked up, and the windmill began turning faster. For the first time since the locks had been changed, the ranch didn't feel like something slipping away. It felt like something preparing to defend itself. The next morning began quietly. Not the peaceful quiet that follows rain. The procedural kind. The kind that settles over a place when everyone involved understands the next move will happen somewhere outside the family. Tom had stayed the night in the bunkhouse. Around 7, he stepped outside with a mug of coffee and his phone pressed to his ear. I could hear his voice through the screen door, low, calm, and clipped in that particular way he used when speaking with professionals instead of relatives. Words drifted inside. Compliance review. Account authority. Yes, the ranch operating account. That was the financial lane beginning to move. I sat at the small bunkhouse table, watching the sun rise slowly over the pasture while my coffee cooled in my hands. The ranch looked exactly as it always had. Cattle moving lazily in the south field, the barn door standing open, dust lifting in soft clouds where a truck had passed earlier. Normal appearances can hide a great deal of structural pressure. Tom stepped back inside about 10 minutes later. They already tried it, he said. Tried what? I asked. The bank. That sentence cooled the room instantly. He sat down across from me and opened his leather folder again. Wade went to First Plains Bank this morning. How do you know that? Because the branch manager called me. I blinked. Why would the bank call you? Because Robert listed me as the legal contact for the estate when the will was filed. Another small detail Robert had quietly put into place. What did Wade try to do? I asked. Tom slid a printed email across the table. Authorize himself as the operational controller for the ranch account. The message was brief and direct. Request for Account Management Authority Wade Walker. Did they approve it? I asked. Tom shook his head. No. Why not? He tapped the bottom of the page. Because the account is still under Robert's estate structure and your name. I exhaled slowly. So the bank refused him? Yes. And? Tom leaned back slightly. And compliance flagged it. That word carried weight. Compliance doesn't belong to family disagreements. It belongs to institutions. What does that mean? I asked. It means the bank logged the request and asked for verification. He folded his hands. Which means we now have documentation that Wade attempted to assume financial control. Outside, a truck door slammed near the house. I looked through the bunkhouse window and saw Wade pacing beside the barn. He moved with the restless energy of someone who had just received news he didn't expect. That's the human reaction, Tom said quietly. I realized he had been watching the same thing. What do you think the bank told him? I asked. Probably something simple. What? Tom gave a small shrug. Something like, the paperwork already has Emily's name on it. That line carried a quiet finality. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. The caller ID showed Wade. I let it ring once before answering. Hello? His voice came through tense. Mum, did you talk to the bank? No. They said they can't authorize anything without you. That sounds correct. Silence stretched across the line. Then Wade spoke again. They're freezing operational changes until things get clarified. That also sounds correct. His breathing came through the phone more heavily now. Why are you making this difficult? That question revealed the mistake he was still making. I answered calmly. I'm not doing anything. He hung up. Across the yard, I could see him pacing again near the barn. The financial lane had shifted the temperature. Tom stood and walked over to the window. Next step will probably be insurance, he said. Insurance? I asked. If someone believes they're running a ranch, they usually try to update liability coverage. Why? Because banks and equipment leases require it. I nodded slowly. Institutional systems rarely move alone. They connect to one another like gears. Around noon, the social lane moved again. Mrs. Carter from the neighboring property pulled into the driveway with her pickup. She stepped out, holding a foil-covered plate. I walked outside to meet her halfway. I heard you've had a busy week, she said gently. In rural communities, that sentence carries a lot of meaning. Yes, I replied. She glanced toward the house. I saw Wade down at the bank this morning. There it was. Community witnesses. I suppose that makes sense, I said. She handed me the plate. Peach cobbler, she said. Figured you might not be cooking much lately. Thank you. She hesitated before climbing back into her truck. Then she added quietly, Robert always said that ranch belonged to you. Another quiet reinforcement from the social lane. When she drove away, I carried the plate back into the bunkhouse. Tom was on the phone again. His voice sounded even calmer now. Yes, I understand. A pause. Yes, we'd appreciate written confirmation. He hung up and looked at me. That was the insurance office. I waited. They received a request this morning. From Wade? Tom nodded. He asked to list himself as the primary operator. And? The agent checked the property records. Tom slid another printed email toward me. Request denied policy holder Emily Walker. I read the line twice. Second institutional refusal, Tom said quietly. That matters. How? I asked. Because it establishes a pattern. Outside, the windmill spun steadily. The ranch looked exactly as it had the day before, but the pressure inside the system had shifted. Later that afternoon, Wade walked directly toward the bunkhouse. He didn't knock. He stepped inside and looked first at Tom. Are you calling everyone in town? Tom remained seated. No. Then why are banks and insurance agents suddenly quoting legal language to me? Tom folded his hands calmly. Because the system works that way. Wade looked at me. Mum, we're supposed to be handling this together. I noticed something new in his voice. Not anger, uncertainty. That emotional shift had finally arrived. I answered quietly. You changed the locks. The sentence sat between us. He looked away. For the first time since Robert died, Wade didn't look like the man controlling the ranch. He looked like someone who had just discovered the ground beneath him had rules. Tom spoke once more before Wade left. You should slow down. Wade frowned. Why? Tom nodded toward the folder on the table. Because every attempt you make to take control activates the clause. Wade didn't answer. He walked out of the bunkhouse slowly this time. From the window, we watched him cross the yard toward the house. The social lane was quiet. The financial lane was tightening. And somewhere inside the legal structure Robert had built years earlier, the rule was beginning to close around the situation. Tom sat back down in his chair. Now the tone changes, he said. How? Performance turns into panic. Outside, the wind picked up across the pasture. And for the first time since the locks had been changed, the ranch felt less like a place under siege and more like a place where the system itself was beginning to speak. The next 2 days passed with a kind of slow tightening. Not loud, not dramatic, just the quiet sound of systems closing around a mistake that had already been made. On the third morning, Tom was standing outside the bunkhouse reading something on his phone when he let out a small breath. That's the one, he said. I stepped onto the porch beside him. What happened? He turned the screen toward me. The subject line read, Compliance. Notice Walker Ranch. Operations. I didn't need to read the rest yet. The title alone carried enough weight. Who sent it? I asked. The bank's compliance department, Tom said. He scrolled so I could see the message. Due to multiple attempts to alter operational authority on the Walker Ranch accounts without verified ownership documentation, the bank is initiating a temporary review of all ranch-related financial activity. Until verification is complete, operational changes are suspended. I read the final line twice. Primary authority remains Emily Walker. That's when the system tightened, Tom said quietly. We stood there for a moment, watching the ranch wake up under a pale Texas sky. The pasture looked the same, as it always had, but the structure behind it had shifted. About an hour later, Wade's truck came tearing down the driveway. He jumped out before the engine had fully stopped. Mum, he called across the yard. Tom stayed beside me on the porch. Wade walked straight toward the bunkhouse, holding his phone out. What did you do? He demanded. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't do anything. The bank froze the ranch account. I heard. They said it's under review because someone reported an authority dispute. Tom spoke calmly. They didn't say someone reported it. Wade turned toward him. Then why did they start a review? Tom folded his arms. Because you tried to change account control. Wade ran a hand through his hair. I was trying to run the ranch. Tom shook his head slightly. You were trying to assume authority. That distinction mattered. Wade looked back at me. Mum, this is getting out of hand. I watched him for a moment before answering. You changed the locks. The sentence settled between us again. Behind Wade, the front door of the house opened. Ron stepped onto the porch. Cheryl followed him. They had clearly been watching. Ron walked halfway across the yard before stopping. This doesn't need to become a legal circus, he said. Tom answered calmly. It already is one. Ron frowned. We're just trying to stabilize the property. Tom nodded toward Wade's phone. Your stabilization attempt triggered a compliance review. Ron's jaw tightened. This is unnecessary. Tom shrugged slightly. Robert disagreed. That was the moment the temperature shifted again. Wade looked between us. What does that mean? Tom reached into his folder and pulled out the will. He didn't hold it up dramatically. He simply opened it to the clause and held it where Wade could see the page. You've already attempted to assume operational control, Tom said. That activates the clause. Wade stared at the document. What clause? The one your father wrote 3 years ago. Tom read the line aloud. If Wade Walker attempts to assume control of the Walker Ranch through coercion or manipulation toward Emily Walker, his inheritance rights are immediately void. The wind moved softly through the pasture behind us. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Wade looked at me. You're actually going to do this? I answered honestly. I didn't write it. Ron stepped forward. This won't stand in court, Tom replied calmly. It already has. He tapped the probate stamp on the document. Filed and witnessed. That's when the yard went quiet. Not stunned silence. A colder one. Cheryl crossed her arms. So what happens now? Tom's voice stayed steady. Now, the clause takes effect. What does that mean? Wade asked. It means the ranch remains under Emily's authority permanently. Ron shook his head. That's not how family property works. Tom gave a small, patient smile. That's exactly how legal property works. Wade's shoulders sagged slightly. For the first time since this began, the certainty had drained out of his posture. What about me? He asked. Tom answered gently. You disqualified yourself. No one moved. The windmill turned slowly behind the barn. A pickup passed along the county road in the distance. Life continued. Finally, Ron spoke again. So we're supposed to just leave? Tom nodded toward the house. Yes. How soon? Tom checked his watch. Today would be appropriate. Ron looked toward Wade, then toward Cheryl. None of them seemed prepared for that answer. But the system had already moved beyond negotiation. About an hour later, a sheriff's truck rolled into the driveway. It wasn't dramatic, it was procedural. The deputy stepped out, adjusted his hat, and walked toward us. Morning, he said. Morning, Tom replied. The deputy glanced around the yard. We received notice from the bank compliance office and the probate file, he said. His tone was neutral. Until authority is resolved, only Emily Walker is authorized to occupy and manage this property. He looked at Wade and Ron. You folks will need to gather your belongings. Ron started to argue. The deputy raised a hand calmly. I'm not here to debate wills, he said. I'm here to enforce property authority. That sentence cooled everything. Over the next 2 hours, the house slowly emptied. Ron loaded his truck. Cheryl packed boxes. Wade moved more slowly than the others. He carried his things out one at a time without speaking. Neighbors drove past on the county road, some slowing slightly. The social lane had reached its quiet conclusion. By late afternoon, the driveway was empty again. The ranch felt larger somehow. Tom stood beside me on the porch. "Well," he said softly, "that's done." I walked inside the house slowly. The living room smelled faintly of dust and furniture polish. Robert's chair still sat beside the fireplace. The framed photograph on the console table had been moved earlier, but I placed it back where it belonged. For a moment, I simply stood there. The house was quiet again. Not lonely. Just settled. Tom stepped inside behind me. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes." Then I said something that had been forming in my mind since the day the locks were changed. "Some people mistake silence for permission." Tom smiled faintly. "They do." I walked to the front door and turned the key in the lock. The click sounded exactly the way it had for 27 years. The ranch had not changed. The rules around it had simply been remembered. And as the evening light settled across the pasture, I understood something Robert had known long before I did. You can't take what was never yours. If stories about quiet boundaries resonate with you, you're welcome to stay.